Hey, what's up, y'all? Jesse here with Southern Reels Fishing, and today I'm going to be giving you a beginner's guide, basically everything that I have learned on how to kayak fish the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So here we go. Okay, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel has to be arguably one of the most iconic fishing spots on the east coast of the United States. Almost 18 miles of man-made structure between the two spans of the bridge, 4 man-made islands, tunnel tubes, not to mention it's only 5 to 6 miles from the open ocean. It is just an amazing place to fish, and it can be fished actually very thoroughly, at least the two ends of it, from a kayak, which is something that when I first got into kayak fishing I always heard about. I saw some videos online of people doing it, but it was very intimidating to me because it is such a big body of water. There are massive currents that run in and out of the Chesapeake Bay, and it can definitely kill you if you are not prepared for it. But if you plan properly and kind of follow these tips that I'm giving you, you can pretty comfortably go out there and fish this bridge and actually get on some of the best fishing of your life. Now, I say the best fishing of your life, I ain't kidding. They are some of the largest fish that I have caught around any bridge that are caught on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. I have personally caught 14-pound sheephead up to 27, 28 inches long. Cobia are caught off of that bridge regularly. Some of the largest flounder in the area are caught off that bridge, or the bridge pilings. Spades, you can catch anything there. Anyway, let's jump right in on how I plan for a trip out there and what I have learned basically in 2 years of fishing it. Now, planning is critical when you go out there. That's the first thing I think that you really need to spend a lot of time on, is learning how to use all the elements and understand them and how they play on what your day is going to be like out there on the water. There are things that you need to look at, like what are the tides doing, the strength or amplitude of the tides, the weather forecast for that particular trip, the wind forecast for that particular trip is a very important one for the Bay Bridge, and of course your kayak and safety equipment that you'll take out there with you, but we'll get that in a second. What I use as far as planning my trips out there are a couple different websites for wind forecasts. I've tried a bunch of different ones. I've kind of settled on the website windy.com, windy.com. I'll put a link above and also in the description a link to all of these. It seems to be the most accurate. It's the easiest to use. They've got beautiful maps on how everything goes. You can pick a specific area and hit a detailed forecast for that particular area, and you can actually take and drag the scroll bar through the days ahead and actually watch the wind directions change and everything. I also like this website because it's got basically 5 different forecast models that you can actually look at the bottom. Now, the ECMWF forecast model, from what I have seen, is the most accurate, and it's pretty impressively accurate. I'll be straight up with you. So as far as the winds, I use windy.com. Another thing concerning the winds and how you plan your trips out to which end of the bridge you want to fish, because you can fish the north and the south ends of the bridge, is you want to have the wind being blocked by the landmass. So it's much easier for this to happen on the south end of the bridge because you have all of Virginia Beach there that can act as a wind block. So when you have those south, southwest, southeast winds coming up, it's coming across that landmass, and basically the land itself is providing cover for the bridge. So you're not going to get near as many waves building, out towards the first island. It's pretty good. As long as you stay with, southeast, southwest winds, you're pretty much good to go. Now, when the winds come from the side, like from the west, the conditions out there can be much rougher with the same level of wind. I would say, if you have the wind coming from the southwest, southeast, on the south end of the bridge, you can get away with up to 15-mile-an-hour winds and still fish pretty comfortably. Now, of course, as you get farther out towards First Island, it's going to get a little bit choppier, but it's definitely doable. Now, when you get west winds coming in, or east winds coming in, especially east winds, you got to be real careful with, because that's going to be pushing waves in from the ocean directly in across the bridge. So east winds, I'll probably say 8 to 10 mile an hour, and it gets pretty gnarly out there. The west winds, you could probably do 10 to 15 as well. Just keep in mind, it can vary depending on the current and what everything's doing. Okay, so when you have winds coming from the north, northeast, and northwest, unfortunately, because there's so much room for it to pick up speed and waves to build across the bay because it's so wide, it can make conditions pretty bad there at the south end of the bridge, and it doesn't take near as much wind to do it. 5 to 8 mile an hour winds steady, can make some pretty sizable rollers by the time they get to the south end of the Chesapeake Bay. And then you have those rollers coming on shore, basically where you're trying to launch. Normally all these other winds that I mentioned, almost like launching in a lake there at Virginia Beach. But when you have the wind coming from the north in any direction, it can actually replicate launching in surf conditions, which is always a challenge. I'd say probably 5 to 8 mile an hour most is all I would ever consider going out there in any type of north wind on the south end of the bridge. On the north end of the bridge, pretty much about the only times that you can fish from the high rise back south is either when there's like literally no wind at all, hardly. I mean, I'm talking like 5 to 8 mile an hour or less. Or if there is any wind above that, it pretty much has to be coming from the north or the northeast and basically blowing across the eastern shore. And the eastern shore in Fisherman's Island is basically acting like a wind block, and it keeps waves from building, too much, and you can actually get out there and fish those areas pretty comfortably. The north end of the bridge is nowhere near as tolerant to winds as far as kayak fishing as the south end is. The south end is much more lenient. Honestly, I really recommend fishing the south end quite a bit before you ever venture out to the north end of the bridge, because it's a whole different ball game up there. As far as tides, I use Tide for Fishing. Once again, I'll put the link above and in the notes. And it's a very detailed website that you can go to. They also have an app for your phone that is called Null Tide. Unfortunately, to use that, other than the current day, you do have to pay a small subscription fee. I mean, it's only a couple of bucks, but it's definitely worth the money. But it will show you as far as the tides, when the outgoing, when the incoming is coming in. The most important factor on that I see is the actual coefficient number. But this coefficient number basically is a simple number from like 0 to about 110, I think it is, that represents the amplitude of the tides. So how much water is flowing out and how much water is flowing in. The higher the number, the more current you're going to run into. And I'll be straight up with you. When you start get up into the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, I really wouldn't plan a trip out there unless you are going to stay close to land and hit it right at that dead tide period, when the tides are changing, because those type of currents running out of that bay can carry you out to sea in a hurry, and them swirling around the pylons is what you're actually trying to get to. Is these pylons along this bridge span in most parts get so bad with the eddies and the swirls and everything around the pylons, it is very dangerous on a kayak. It can get you quick. So my thoughts on that, anything probably 80 and up, I wouldn't plan on even going out there. So look for the lower coefficient numbers. It's much more manageable. And another thing to keep in mind is tidal lag. Now you'll look at these numbers that say, low tide is at 12 noon. Well, because of the sheer volume of water that is moving out of the bay, heading out, low tide may actually be at noon there, and that ocean is starting to come back in. The ocean is already pushing back in, but it takes time, is what they call tidal lag. And sometimes it's 3 to 4 hours in the bay before that massive volume of water slows down and turns, and the ocean actually starts pushing and starts going back in. This is more so apparent on outgoing tides from what I've seen. You can't always count on what that tidal chart says, because it's typically at least 3 hours of tidal lag, if not more, in the Chesapeake Bay around the bridge. So keep that in mind when you're trying to plan a trip, for a slack tide, because a lot of times that's the easiest time to fish the islands. Another big thing is weather. You got to really become a meteorologist, learn how to read the weather. You don't want to be out at the first island, have a storm come up on you, if you are able to predict it. Now, summertime, it happens. Storms pop up out of nowhere. If there's a chance of storms and stuff, just to keep that in mind, because it really is about a 45-minute pedal in a pedal kayak to get out to the first island in good conditions. In bad conditions, it can be over an hour easy, and a storm can come up out of nowhere in a lot less time than that and get you off guard. So you definitely got to be real diligent on watching the weather. Now, if you do get caught out there in a storm, a thunderstorm or something like that, best thing to do is just hunker down under one of the bridges, kind of stay tucked in behind some pylons, use the bridge for shelter, and just keep yourself in that spot. Don't get right up against the pylons. I wouldn't recommend that. I would stay, if the wind's coming from a certain direction and the waves kind of stay on the back side of a set of pylons and away from a little bit. That way you're not getting banged into them. But that's about the best way to handle a storm there. And if it's lightning, there's really not much you can do. Just try to stay under the bridge, and hopefully, it stays away from you. Next thing I want to cover is your kayak and equipment. You definitely don't want to go out there in a sit-in kayak. You want a sit-on-top kayak with a sealed hull. And that way, if you do get rolled, you can just roll it back over and keep on fishing. The lighter weight kayaks seem to do better. I mean, you can take, some of these big Hobie Pro Anglers. I used to have a Pro Angler myself. I launched it a few times there off the beach. It is ridiculously heavy, and I ended up switching to the Outbacks because they're, to me, just better suited for ease of launch and lightweight, and they just seem to handle much better out there around the bridge pylons and stuff. That's just my opinion. I definitely recommend pedal kayaks versus paddle kayaks. You know, not saying you can't go out there paddling and fish, but you will definitely get a whole lot more fishing time if you have the ability to pedal, because most of the time you're constantly fighting currents and you're trying to stay close to these pylons. And if you're having to paddle, you're losing half, if not more, of your fishing time just trying to stay where you want to be, because once that water gets flowing, it's just going to carry you where it wants to. Pedal kayaks definitely have an advantage out there. Now let's talk about safety equipment. Definitely some important items you want to take with you. Life jacket. Now I wear inflatable life jackets. I used to have one that I just wore around my waist. Found out that really wasn't a good idea because it didn't really offer much flotation at all. I upgraded to one of these right here. It goes over your shoulders like so. You pull the tab, it inflates. This is nice because it stays behind your head. It keeps you afloat. Much better option, much more comfortable than a standard life jacket. Now standard life jackets, of course, you know, work as well. And you definitely want to keep a check on the CO2 cartridges in these. You know, make sure that they're still showing good. Very important, life jacket. Next thing is a paddle. Now, of course, if you're paddling out there, you want to have a paddle. But a lot of guys I see go out there and pedal kayaks, they don't have a paddle with them. You could have a drive failure. Drive could fall out. You could flip over and lose your drive. Any number of things could happen. And if you don't have a backup propulsion system, a paddle, it can be a problem. And this has actually saved me one time, not at the Bay Bridge, but at another fishing spot to where I had a drive failure and I didn't have any way to fix it. And I ended up having to paddle the whole rest of the trip. So always bring it, even if you have a pedal drive. I will not ever go kayaking without this. A pump. This here is just a basic siphon pump. You stick it in your kayak, you pump it like this, it shoots the water out the side. This here saved my Hobie Pro Angler out at the Eastern Shore when I got rolled in the surf. My hull of that kayak was half flooded during that incident, and I was still trapped on the outside of the breakers. So this came in very handy. Pumped all the water out, and I was able to actually save my kayak and all my fishing gear. So definitely invest in these. You can get them right at Walmart. I never go out in my kayak without this. All right, next big things, of course, are you want some type of sound making device, like a whistle or something like that. That way, if you do end up in the water, you can get somebody's attention. VHF handheld floating radio. I do have one. It's actually in my boat right now. I recommend keeping it attached to you as opposed to stowed away in your kayak. That way, if you do end up in the water, it's on you and you can use it. Also, I definitely recommend a first aid kit because stuff happens when you're fishing. Waterproof one, of course. I keep mine in a dry box. And of course, sunscreen. Water is a critical thing. Definitely take plenty of water with you. You got to keep hydrated out there. It's very important. All right, next thing I want to talk about is parking and launching. Now, if you're trying to fish the south end of the bridge out to the first island, you're pretty much stuck parking in Virginia Beach on the side of the road somewhere. Now, the rule is you can park anywhere as long as you're not blocking something, as long as it's not labeled no parking, and as long as your tires are off the pavement. And if you drive around, you'll see areas where people park like that all the time, and it is okay to have a trailer there too, like a small jet ski trailer or something like that if your kayak's on a trailer. Anywhere that is a public access, you can drag your kayak over and launch there. Now, there is one that's very popular. I'm not going to say its name because I don't want to upset everybody that kayak fishes here all the time, but if you look hard enough at a map, you can figure it out. So anyway, that's the south end, is you're pretty much beach launching. Now, you're going to want either the buddy system to help carry each other's kayak out, because since they replenish the beach there, it is quite a drag, dragging your kayak and all your gear out there to the beach. You know, I do highly suggest some sand wheels and some way of putting them on your kayak. If you're going by yourself, it's almost critical. You got to have sand wheels to get out there. The regular hard wheels do not work. You do not, you'll kill yourself trying to drag your kayak with some hard wheels. It just doesn't work. They just plow in the sand. So definitely the big inflatable beach wheels is what you want. On the north end of the bridge, if you're trying to fish that, you can pretty much launch out of, I think Wise Point is the only one that's even feasible. And it is a hike to get out there. You pretty much got to go under the little bridge at Wise Point. You have to go all the way around Fisherman's Island, and then you're pretty much at the high-rise bridge. Now keep in mind, and I want to warn you guys about this, on the outgoing tide, there is a crazy current that runs around Fisherman's Island. There's a really deep channel there. When it gets out by the bridge, that current mixes with the incoming waves that are coming in, and it creates a very dangerous zone for kayaks. The way that current rolling out as hard as it does around that island and the waves coming in, it makes these weird swirly wavy things, and it will just roll you right over and not even blink. I highly recommend staying out of there. Stay out from under that high-rise bridge. unless it is dead calm current. It can be a little crazy coming in as well, so just keep that in mind. Once you get away from the high rise and back to where the bridge goes back flat again, it gets much calmer. Now keep in mind, you're talking about pedaling 3-4 miles at that point, which is doable, but there's incredible fishing out there. It's definitely worth it. The best thing to do on the eastern shore to get out to that part of the bridge is time the tides. Ride the tide out, fish as long as you can, and then ride the tide back in. You try to do it the other way, you're going to kill yourself. On the south end of the bridge, the tides aren't that difficult to deal with because they're kind of running crossways to the bridge. So the tides are going this way, but you're paddling that way. So you're always kind of paddling at an angle into them, or that, just trying to keep the direction that you're going. They're not near as difficult on the south end of the bridge to deal with. Well, there you go, folks. That's everything that I got, at least that I can think of right now. Now, I'm sure there's something that I missed. If that's the case, leave a comment below. I'll definitely pin it at the top. If you have any questions, hit me up by email, which is actually at the top of my YouTube channel page. If you like this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button as well. Always helps me out. Anyway, I hope this helps you in some way. Remember, just prepare yourself, plan, right equipment, and go for it. And I promise you, you'll get on some of the biggest fish of your life. Anyway, that's it. Peace. Have a good one.